We want to thank today's sponsor, Age Up. People are living longer than ever, but few can actually afford it. With small dollar payments now, Age Up provides guaranteed monthly income for life beginning at the selected target payout age between 91 and 100. Head to age-up.com/That Annuity Show. That's age-up.com/That Annuity Show to get started and see how Age Up can help you guarantee supplemental income for yourself or for a loved one living past the ripe age of 90.
Welcome to That Annuity Show, the podcast that will make you an expert in explaining annuities to your clients. Give us 30 minutes each week and we'll shave hours from your client presentations. Now, here's your host, Paul Tyler.
Hi, this is Paul Tyler, and welcome to another episode of That Annuity Show. And with us are all our regular hosts. Mr. Will Moorcroft, how are you?
Excellent. Great to be here.
Mark Fitzgerald, good to see you today. And,
Good to see you. Good morning.
And of course, Ramsey. Ramsey, how are you?
I'm fantastic.
Good. And you got a couple of very interesting guests for us. Do you want to do the introductions and set up the discussion?
Absolutely. So, as you know, we had Michelle Richter from formerly of Milliman on maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago to talk about issues related to annuities. And contemporaneously with that appearance, she had co-written a piece with Sheila and with Suzanne about really what is a fantastic opportunity in the advisor space for just an expanded role for female advisors, much beyond what we're currently seeing. And they wrote this fantastic paper that it supplies just an enormous amount of statistics. And so both qualitatively and quantitatively makes a very strong case for for us as an industry to really leverage more female voices. And so we thought, well, we gotta have these folks on to talk about it. So we're fortunate to have with us today Sheila and Suzanne. And I am going to let Sheila and Suzanne talk about, introduce themselves and talk about what each of them does at Milliman. And then we'll get right into it. There's going to be more today than we're going to be able to talk about, which is a good thing. And we hope that everybody listens to the show takes the time to read the paper as well, because it's super enlightening. So with that, why don't we start with you, Suzanne? Tell us about what you do at Milliman, and hopefully both of you can tell us about what was the impetus for writing this important paper.
Sure. Thanks, Ramsey. Thanks, everybody. Great to be with you today. And I am a principal with Milliman. I'm based in Boston, but our practice at Milliman is the Financial Risk Management Group based in Chicago. I've been with Milliman 8 years now, and I've had a few roles, but currently I'm head of our strategic relationships, which essentially means that we work with insurance companies, investment firms, looking for new opportunities, but financial firms in the industry to partner with. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Sheila, you're up.
Absolutely. Sheila Jelinek, been with Milliman for 5 years now. I am a business development officer, and my role primarily at Milliman is working with the VA sub-account space. So I work with the wholesalers and help explain our story, the Milliman risk management overlay. And as to echo a few of Suzanne's words, also look for other opportunities from a business development standpoint. So been with Milliman for 5 years, been in the industry a little over 25, and just happy to be here.
All right. Can you tell us very quickly, one, about what Milliman does and why they play such an important role in the insurance industry? And then from that, we'll just get right into what made you guys decide to write this amazing paper.
Sure.
Yeah, I will maybe just, tell you what our mission statement is as a firm, because those that are listening who don't know Milliman, we are one of the largest independent actuarial consulting firms in the world. Sheila and I often joke that we are not actuaries, so we're sort of a different breed within the firm. But the firm really has expanded. In fact, I think if we think about the mission statement, which is to help our clients protect the health and financial well-being of people everywhere, because we are a consultant, we don't necessarily work directly with the public. I think that gets to the heart of what knits together all the various practices, healthcare. Sheila and I have a new healthcare paper coming out shortly. We have an employee benefits group. We have a lot of technology. So really, if you think about that kind of key orientation point, we really, our chairman, Ken Mungan, will often say we're kind of a tech firm, when you look beyond the actual consulting. And I think that there are a lot of solutions in the retirement space that aren't necessarily visible. So when I think about why Sheila and I came together to write this paper, it's really to express a lot of the expertise that we have in this space with the work that FRM is doing and various practices, and particularly being concerned for women's well-being. So that's a little bit about Milliman and why I came to write the paper. So I'll pass it to Sheila now.
Certainly. When the catalyst for writing the paper, I'll kind of go back to the beginning of when I started in the industry over 25 years ago. Literally starting in the industry, answering the phone, being a sales assistant. And over my 25-year plus journey, being an equity analyst for one of the largest pension funds in the U.S., working for one of the largest wealth management teams in the U.S., and then in 2007, transitioning to wholesaling and expanding my passion, if you will, for annuities. I've had many roles over my career. And as I look in the rearview mirror, I feel very privileged to have had the experiences and been able to work in different capacities for different firms. But I look in the rearview mirror, and the thing that's missing are the women. Where are the women? Where are the women in financial, professional, more sales and client-facing roles? And the idea was to really bring awareness of this in this paper, and to hopefully be a catalyst for change and have our voices heard. So that's really the passion I have behind writing the paper.
Yeah, well, one stat you mentioned in there, it's interesting. It's 8 out of 10 advisors are men, 2 out of 2. Yeah, well, who are the other 2? Oh, the other 2 are women. That stat is the same statistics. It's amazing as I think when I entered the business, which I won't tell you, it was a long time ago. It's like the needle. That gas needle just stuck there. I mean, how should we interpret that? It doesn't feel like it's moved one way or the other. Am I wrong over the last 20 years?
No, and I haven't quantified my journey, and yeah, I'm going on 3 decades now. And I would say, like you made me, Sheila. I guess I have to, sisterhood.
I didn't disclose the real math. I said 25 plus.
Yeah, exactly. So, we talk a lot about it, and I think there's a danger, and certainly coming from this, being in the industry is in the investment side for so long, the danger of correlation causation, right? I mean, they don't, you can get confused, but I see a couple of trends. And one of the things that seems to be consistent, I really do follow that you have to see it to be it. And I think that, in the hiring practices, the recruiting practices, there aren't a lot of female leaders. Sally Krawchak is out there as a big thought leader, and we've quoted her in a couple of papers. So I do think that there's that certain aspect. The culture is something else, because Sheila and I think, we can certainly say it's public where we've worked. We spent the majority of our careers at Merrill Lynch. And I do think that there is something about coming into a room where you're the only woman. That may be intimidating for some women that weren't necessarily exposed to this as a career option. So that's another kind of reason for writing the paper, to raise awareness. So I'll pause there and pass it to Sheila.
I echo everything that Suzanne is saying, and I'll add a couple of things as I really ponder this. Why hasn't the needle moved, if you will? Why don't we have more women in the industry? And I really look at it as really three challenges that we have faced and continue to face. And number one, from the female perspective, that work-life balance. So a female has her work life, and then she has her home life. Her second job begins when she goes home. And it's sometimes a challenge to transition from a 9 to 5 job where at 5 o'clock you go home and you begin your second job of raising your family. Often when you look at financial professionals, those hours go well beyond 5 o'clock, whether it's prospecting, meeting with clients after hours, seminars. So it's fine tuning that work-life balance, and also compensation and the compensation structure, because I think back to when I began in a support role where I had the majority of my fellow female colleagues. When you're in that support salary role, you have that income stability, you have the known, you know what your paycheck is going to be every week, 2 weeks, month, what have you. To transition into a commission or fee-based role, while the upside is much greater, it's tough. It's a tough challenge there. So I think we struggle with how do we structure that compensation so it is beneficial for women that are challenged to maybe go to that different type of structure. And the third thing I will say is just breaking through those stereotypes. I mean, it's a man's world, as the song says. It's a male-dominated industry, and I can really echo that with my Southern roots and upbringing, and growing up in a very male-dominated household. It's really educating women and breaking those stereotypes. So I think those are three challenges that we continually face, but are definitely not insurmountable.
Yeah, I guess in the firms I've worked with or been associated with, I mean, there are some women who are spectacularly successful. In fact, you know, we had one on here a couple of weeks ago, Kathy DeWitt. I saw this at a couple. I've seen this in independent broker dealers, career shops, where there are women who've cracked that code. It's just there aren't enough of them. Now, I think back to the programs that I've seen or supported or been, you know, around. You know, they include, you know, targeted recruiting, targeted training, mentor programs. I don't know. Will, you know, and Mark and I are at one of the same companies that did this. You know, I'm thinking of the programs we saw. I mean, which of any of those have they actually? Which ones have worked the most or the best? Mark, from your perspective, when if you look at sort of the traditional career agency, you know, brokerage type firms, where have you seen most success in sort of like, you know, changing the male female ratio?
Yeah, so over the years, from a wholesaling perspective, I've noticed, to your point, career certainly would have a higher concentration, and a lot of the bank investment programs I found to have a higher concentration of female advisors. And I guess from your perspective, what do you think is driving that? Is there any specific attributes about that program that you think would be driving that?
Or is it the culture of the organizations themselves?
Well, that's what I'm thinking. It could be the culture of those organizations.
I think
well,
into that, Suzanne.
Yeah, well, I was about to say that, you know, when I think bank, because Sheila and I certainly in various roles throughout the decades have had a chance to see different distribution channels, different practices, been part of successful practices. I think there's something about the bank channel in the sense that the clients are walking through the door. That doesn't mean that you're not having to prospect and work on client retention and you know, get more business from the clients. But there is, to me, almost a binary sense of either you are fed leads or you have to go find everything yourself. And I know there's the term, you know, eat what you kill. And I think in the old days of commission only business, that became very daunting. And to Sheila's point, you know, with the second shift of raising children. Not to say men are not participating as parents, but the stats are what the stats are. And so there's that burden of having to prospect after hours that I think really would limit a lot of women in certain channels. But that the bank channel tends to have a built-in client base.
Yeah, and I just add to that, Mark. Having been a sales rep in a bank, a number of banks earlier in my career, your hours are kind of more limited. The clientele is generally the bank customer, so you're not. The expectations are different because I worked at another independent broker dealer, not through a bank channel, and also through a bank channel. The bank channel was the hours were more contained, and the expectation of doing seminars and extra, kind of after hours prospecting, et cetera, phone calls, all those things that we a lot of us have done, weren't as the expectations were different.
Yeah, I think when in general, I would say what I've seen in the sales systems I've been affiliated with, probably the biggest success factor for somebody coming into the business was being mentored by somebody who was successful inside the shop, right? And people tended to mentor people who looked or acted like they did, and that was my experience. So I think it's interesting. I think these systems tend to propagate what made them successful initially. I don't know, Ramsey, what's your perspective? I mean, I'm sure at your prior firm you saw a number of diversity or women and diversity type initiatives. I mean, what worked, what didn't, and
So you brought up a very important point there is sort of mentorship and sponsorship, and those aren't the same things. So mentorship is, I'll call it advice. Sponsorship is skin in the game. So certainly when you had, again, whether it was women or any, underrepresented group, to the extent that talented individuals were sponsored, and so somebody senior sort of put their credibility behind somebody, then that yielded additional opportunities. So you need to have enough of those relationships to happen, to sort of move things, to move people up the ranks. But one of the things I want to do to highlight that was I was sort of noticing as we were talking about this is, and thinking about the, some of the prep notes that we put together you put together really, as we were talking about this discussion, is this disconnect between a system, an incentive system and a structure of the business versus, what actually meets the client's needs. And as I look through the notes you prepared, there's a lot of discussion in there about, well, what actually does an advisor do? And what is it about advice that maybe women can just do better in general, or certainly do better for certain audiences than maybe the current system allows. So would love to hear your thoughts on that. So one was, what do you think like a good advisor does? And two, where do you think women have a particular advantage, bring a particularly different skill set and perhaps empathy that serves the client's needs better?
Sure. Sheila, do you want me to start?
Sure, Suzanne, you take it.
I was getting a vibe because in the paper we write about the classic sort of education track, and Sheila will certainly talk about this because she does have a traditional education background. Mine is not traditional, and I was a liberal arts major, started as philosophy, graduated with a degree in psychology and communication. So I spent a lot of time thinking about behavioral finance aspects in our industry, but the nuances I think are very clear in the research that we reported, which is that a client isn't necessarily going to come to a relationship with an advisor, whether it be referred, interviewing, what have you, knowing to ask the right questions on the investment. That's sort of the advisor's job, right? But what we see reported time and time again in the surveys are what clients are looking for is somebody they can trust, They want personalization. They want, empathy. You mentioned, Ramsey. And one of the things that I see happening, this inflection point with our industry right now, and we'll certainly get to stats if you want about the money in motion and the amount of advisors retiring, but we're in this decumulation era. And this is a slightly different skill set for some of the more traditional advisors that say, I am going to deliver alpha and I am going to build you the best portfolio out there. And I think we all would agree that with the technology era, a lot of that is very commoditized now. So it's the ability to build that relationship with the client that we hear time and time again. They want a goal, or women especially want a goal-oriented relationship, meaning that you probably as an advisor aren't going to get fired if you didn't deliver, 12, somebody got 12%, you got 10. It's, did I meet the goal of, and Sheila has a high passion for this, talking about all the long-term care issues, but did I help the client reach the goal? And one of the things as a female advisor that we saw in the research was that everyone has the ability to develop their emotional intelligence. And if you take pieces of emotional intelligence, absolutely, like I did a leadership program last year, and men absolutely can have super high emotional intelligence, but consistently where we see the X factor for women is that they score higher in cognitive empathy as well as emotional empathy. And those kind of connect to, do I know how the other person sees things with that cognitive empathy? And then emotional empathy is, can I feel what they're feeling? And so if I think to what's important, the term is bandied about, and actually it's a real term now, financial therapist. So I do see that there's some advantages with what's happening with the client needs out there, and where women have very strong skills innately. So Sheila?
Sure. While to your point, my educational background was more finance and business. It does not have to be that. I think really communication and listening skills are paramount. And the investment track and the investment acumen can be learned. We have to be licensed to give advice in this industry. So really, it's so much more than stocks, bonds, asset allocation, and mutual funds. It goes well beyond that. And it's interesting that you use that term financial therapist, because I've always said over my 25-year plus career, you're not only a financial professional, you may be a marriage counselor, you may be a guidance school counselor, you're helping with Medicare decisions, long-term care. The financial planning pie has gotten much larger. And the need to have those specialized skill sets, which really I look at it as, I call it the CCE, three things: competency, compassion, and empathy. When you look at studies of when clients or prospects, I should say, are interviewing advisors and what they're looking for, to your point, Suzanne, it's not who's going to make the best return and what did last year look like and the it's not that at all. It's more of, is this person competent? Do they listen to my needs? Are they a consultant? Are they solutions based? And that's where I think women bring a lot to the table with those planning, solution-based, listening, empathetic skills.
Well, you kind of raised a kind of interesting question in my mind. Like, I remember at one point, prior firm, I think our marketing department did a research project on was women financial advice, and trying to say, well, what is it? Let's look at the difference between the clientele of the men versus the women. And there actually wasn't. I think a hypothesis going in was, women must sell to women. And in fact, it turned out the men had almost same mix of female versus male clients as this group did. Now, this is back about 10 years. Now, maybe we didn't ask the right questions. I mean, do you think that there's something fundamental? If we'd asked different questions of the clients, do you think they would have had different answers as to what that advisor was doing for them or what their value was? just based on the fact of, of the gender of the advisor?
Sure. I will go back to my experiences over my 25 years. I've seen a lot. I've seen what works and what doesn't work. And what has worked is when I see an advisor insist with financial planning to have a meeting with both the husband and wife. Again, very traditional Southern household, old school, men handle the money. Well, it's not that way any longer. Women do control the money. Women do take charge there. Not control wholeheartedly. Let me rephrase that.
I'll give you that one straight up.
Maybe that was phrased improperly, but women have a very big say, I will say. And the successful advisors speak to both the husband and the wife, because essentially you've got to have the wife's buy-in. And to your point, are there different questions that could be asked? I would say not necessarily different questions, maybe more open-ended questions, more fact-finding, really getting to know that client, really learning the client's goals. Suzanne talked earlier about goals-based financial planning. I think it's really retooling the conversation and the delivery of the questions, and really bringing that woman into the mix and making her comfortable and feel confident, and lowering the intimidation bar goes a long way. And I think if there could be some retooling and reframing, you would see more male advisors bring on more female clients.
Yeah. And I know that unconscious bias is at play a lot of times. So, I don't want to keep focusing on negative, but I will say that, to Sheila's point, raising awareness, whether it be for women advisors, male advisors, to let people or make sure people are heard. And I'll share a quick story with someone that I know who is married and in the industry. The husband is not. It's a female friend. And they have been very clear with the advisor that she actually is the person that he, and it's a male advisor, needs to work with, because and they've been very clear, this is her role. And she notices in almost every meeting that the advisor kind of can't help himself. He just talks to the husband. And they kind of call it out and say, you're forgetting that, she's the one who knows everything. She's the one that we've delegated the responsibility in the marriage to, the investment decisions, and it's so I would advise any male advisors, to Sheila's point, that may not be connecting with women, or as we talk in the paper, the stats that talk about the percentage of widows that leave their financial advisor, and the research isn't super clear if the advisor was a male. So I want to be, totally fair here, that it could have been a female advisor, but they are leaving. And since we know 8 out of 10 advisors are male, it's highly likely that, that there are more men that male advisors, that those widows are leaving. So the advantage goes to anyone, gender, no matter the gender, to making sure that people are heard.
So one of the things that sort of struck me about this conversation is that there's a need and there's an opportunity, right? And there's also a sense that things should be righter than they are. We should have more sort of a diverse set of advisors. But fundamentally behind that, it strikes me that there's this real opportunity. So you had some stats in your notes about how many advisors are going to be retiring. So you have, well, that's one stat. And the other stat you might share with us is just indications of how under-advised U.S. consumers are. So you have this opportunity to serve people, and you have a need for a greater number of advisors. And what are some of your thoughts on those two things?
Sure. Sheila, do you want to?
Sure,
Okay.
you can chime in.
Okay.
I like to refer to this as, when you look at the number of advisors that will soon be retiring, there's a statistic that was referenced in the paper. For every college graduate, there are 2 financial advisors that become Social Security eligible. So you are going to have a huge transition and a need to have succession planning to serve those clients as these advisors retire. And you couple that with this huge wealth transfer, $30 trillion that's going to be coming down the pipe from the baby boomers, and there's your opportunity there. I think really, if we can look at the opportunity and match that need with the need to have more consultative female advisors to meet this need, overcoming the challenges that we addressed early on in the podcast, I think there's a great opportunity for new recruits that are new to the industry. Second act advisors, as we reference in the paper there, these would be second career folk. Again, it does not have to be from a business background. We've seen many walks of life, if you will, from second career folks that have had great success in the financial industry. I think it's really tying back to the communication and listening skills there, but it is a great opportunity, and we need to be prepared for that.
Well, listen, imagine I'm an agent. I personally believe that team selling is much more powerful than trying to, be a lone wolf and try to be an expert. Even if you are an expert on multiple topics, sometimes the credibility isn't there. So you sold me. I've got 2 people in my office, 2 guys who are, working with me. I want to bring a woman into the office. How do I need to think through our office culture? I mean, how do I make that? How do I make this my office work and be one that where we actually have a chance of keeping and retaining a female advisor?
Well, we, one of the conversations we had, I think offline, but related to the team approach itself. And I think that there are a couple things that I've observed, and I think Sheila and I have talked about it over the years, that sometimes that partnership isn't really well defined. And it's sort of back to, we know, maybe 1 out of 10, trainees actually survive in this industry. I think having more transparency on what roles and expectations are, because Ramsey, you mentioned something earlier, I think, about kind of sponsorship, mentorship. And I always think of this industry, especially with the team design, as an apprenticeship, because you're bringing in someone who maybe doesn't know as much, a rookie, and there can sometimes be, without defined roles, some maneuverability with the alpha type behavior that you can see in a higher I always have trouble with that word, but in a hierarchy where there's sort of the alpha dog, whether male or female, and then the also rans. And when you're bringing in a junior person, giving them that space and clarity on what their role and expectations are, and then compensation, because I think sometimes that whole, you work with our B and C clients and suddenly an A client develops, do they get to keep the A client? And, we've observed, Sheila and I can chime in, I think, equally on this one, that, it sometimes doesn't happen, that you get to keep what you earn.
Correct. Yes, I echo clearly defined goals, expectations, clearly defined compensation grid, and just a mutual respect for everyone on the team, male or female.
So I think you guys have laid out a really solid case for inclusion of women in any practice. So if I was, if I rewound myself back to when I was a registered rep sitting in an office, and I was recruiting someone, I mean, I would certainly include females for all the reasons that you've explained. why aren't people doing that in your mind? I mean, because it's clear that there is a need, there's an opportunity, all of the things that you guys have articulated. But how do we like parlay that obvious obvious need into an actual like execution of getting those women started in the career, whether it's through an apprenticeship, like Suzanne mentioned, or a mentorship or sponsorship to get licenses, like Ramsey mentioned? How do we kind of connect the dots there to make it happen?
Well, oh, sorry, Sheila, do you want to go?
I'll say a few words because I know what you want to talk.
Yeah.
It's so very important what you're about to say, but
I'm not sure what I'm going to say. If I don't say it, tell me.
Okay. It begins at the top down, and really the things that we talked about, the challenges that we know women face with the work-life balance, the support, the compensation structure, and education, and breaking through those stereotypes and really educating. And I'm about to lob this over to Suzanne, at a young age from a financial literacy standpoint. And I'll hand it over to Suzanne with that.
Yeah, thank you. We are telepathically connected. I was going there. Well, there's a quote that we put in the paper, which I'll mention now. It's the great Maya Angelou, and I think this goes back to why we did this, but also what we have to do every day. And it says, each time a woman stands up for herself without knowing it, without claiming it, she stands up for all women. And I do make this call to action for men as well, but we need to be out in the community, and especially as women who've been doing this successfully for decades, talking to the next generation. So I always call out that financial literacy, there is a dearth, as we all know. I mean, very, very few states proportionally actually require financial literacy. And so I, as a stepping into a leadership role, I joined the Junior Achievement Board in Boston so that I could be out there doing financial literacy training for children. I also engaged with CFA Boston, which anyone can join. I actually do not have, I'm not a charter holder, but there is a very robust financial literacy community in Boston, so we educate adults. So I think it's being visible, and especially with younger women. Now, as we want to call out women choosing this as a second career or mid-career change, but the fact is, we sometimes joke when you think about in school when you had and I'm forgetting the term now, but when someone came in and said, "I'm a fireman," or like somebody help me, what was that called? Career day or whatever, who came in and talked about investments as a woman, and exposing younger girls, I think is a big deal. Back to, you have to see it to be it. Mm-hmm. So we need to step into that space.
Interesting, Mark. And I'm thinking about some of our distribution firms that are focused on actively recruiting and training new agents, not from sort of the quote unquote professional full-time model, but part-time model, getting people to transition later. Right or wrong, it feels to me when I show up for some of those meetings, it feels like a much more diverse collection of agents, both from racial perspective, but also from a male-female perspective. Am I off base, Mark, in my assessment of these groups?
And no, I think that's spot on, Paul. I think you're absolutely right. More of the career-oriented shops definitely seem like they've got a broader distribution in terms of their agent base. And I think the ones that are probably drawing more from the broker dealers, to your point earlier, 8 in 10 advisors are male. I think they're drawing more from that population of a broker dealer audience. So I think that's spot on. I think that the more career-driven shops that are out recruiting are definitely having a broader diversification of agents in their field force.
Yeah. So I don't know. This is great. Ramsey, what other questions should we cover here, do you think?
I think we've covered a really a broad spectrum of things. I just really come back to this concept of opportunity, and I'm reminded of sort of two quick anecdotes, right? So when I was in business school, we did a case about big famous investment bank, growing in a foreign country. I don't want to name the country; it doesn't really matter. But it was a country where like there was not historically a big role for women. They were competing against local firms, and what they figured out is there were all these amazingly talented women that weren't getting hired simply because of the culture of the place. So they just focused on recruiting women, and it was enormously successful. So it was a U.S. company in a foreign country. They focused on recruiting women, and they got all these amazingly talented people because they were unfortunately being overlooked by the local firms. So like I just think that like when driven by opportunity and people really understand they're missing out, like I think that's an important thing to sort of hang on to here. And then another thing sort of much more personally is like in running my own business, I spent a lot of time talking to software vendors. And again, the single most effective salespeople I have spoken to have been women working from home and just getting it done. They know the answers to all my questions before I ask them. They are super responsive, great on following up. And, amazingly, I'm sure they're doing all that while balancing like everything else they have going on in their lives. So I've always felt like that was the standard for sort of somebody working from in a telesales perspective that required expertise beyond just the sale. And so I just had, those are just two quick anecdotes that sort of come to mind. I think there's a great opportunity here. I think it's fantastic that Sheila and Suzanne, you guys have, taken the mantle to write about this, identify the qualitative and qualitative support for this process. And I really like the idea that you focus not just on bringing young people into the business, but you focus on second acts. And second acts have never been more important, right? Because especially in a COVID world, more people need jobs. We know that financial advice is broadly needed, and I think that there's a ton of opportunities here. So I just leave with a number of really interesting, from my perspective, interesting observations, and I hope that we as an industry can take full advantage of it, I should say.
So just a kind of more of a closing, how do people get the article? Is it on the website? Is it available? Has it been disseminated? Because I think it's really a worthwhile read for a variety of people for all the reasons that you've talked about and many more.
Yeah, we can provide the URL, but if you go and just do a quick search for the case for more female advisors and maybe put the search word Milliman in there, it will automatically come up on milliman.com.
Yeah, we'll definitely put a link in our show notes to your paper. So I don't know, Mark, any thoughts on your end?
No, I think one other stat that was very interesting, and it goes back to kind of the disconnect, if you will. And Paul, you mentioned the 8 out of 10 advisors being men. Yet if you look historically, the actual performance of women investors has outpaced those of male investors, and with less trading volatility, which would give less beta, so less overall volatility. I think that's an important point to bring up because I think that should really kind of make those stats transition much more in the other direction. For more female advisors.
Yeah, we put it in there because, again, there's a dearth for financial literacy for men and women, right? But when you do think about, and Sheila talked about it earlier, that historical sort of like, well, that's not really my role. That's more of a male role. And I would add, as we put in there, and I think everyone should know this by now, there are more female STEM graduates right now than men. So that's exciting. But I guess the fact is that we put one of the Warwick University study stats in there because to really inspire women that I know it was a study and, it was certainly kind of ivory tower, but women can be just as successful investors as men, whether that's a client or that's an advisor. So I see the playing field. We kind of need to, I think, need to be, inspire women and encourage them with some of those stats. But they're the only thing that I would also identify with that, and that sort of connects to the need of the clients out there, because you do see statistics saying that there are a lot of women that would like to work with female advisors. So back to a call to action for the industry. If women clients are asking for this, there should be more of them. But I think that there are some biases out there, and I think we put it in the paper that Sally Krawcheck had called it out as well, that women can also be successful investors, but sometimes default to more conservative behaviors, which can be leave a lot of money on the table, right? So if you're sitting in cash, as we all know, I know technically we're not negative interest rates, but effectively after tax.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to really also make sure that all clients are educated, where should they?
Yeah, well, hey, listen, Sheila, Suzanne, thanks so much for joining us. We will definitely put the link in our show notes. And what's the best way for people to reach out to either one of you if they have additional questions or comments?
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
Yeah, we really would love to hear from people. We love to collect stories.
Yes.
Excellent. All right.
Yeah.
Hey, Wilson, thanks so much. This was a great conversation, and let's maybe if anything good comes from being stuck in remote world and quarantine, maybe it creates more opportunities, to get women involved and also for companies to change the way they're looking at how they're delivering advice and meeting customer needs. So, thanks so much.
Wonderful.
Thanks,
conversation, guys. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. And be sure to tune in next week for another episode of That Annuity Show.
Hi, this is Ramsey Smith, co-host of That Annuity Show and founder of Alex.fyi. I want to talk a little bit about Age Up. They are our first sponsor here on That Annuity Show, and they have a very unique and innovative product. As most of us know, people are living longer than ever before. Unfortunately, fewer and fewer can afford it. With small dollar payments now, Age Up provides guaranteed monthly income for life, beginning at the selected target payout age between 91 and 100 years old. Head to ageup.com, that's age-up.com/thatannuityshow to get started and see how Age Up can help you guarantee supplemental income for yourself or a loved one living past 90.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend us on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information at thatannuityshow.com.